Next up, we've got another Elder Dragon. In fact, we've got quite a few Elder Dragons in a row here. We have Sadeas. Sadeas was the final boss monster, or one of the endgame Elder Dragon monsters in Monster Hunter Tri. And this thing was sort of like the later Siege type monsters in that it was a giant undersea whale type creature, and you fight it underwater. And it has these two large horns and sort of a long body. Kind of like the Lao Shan fight, you sort of follow it along in a corridor, you do damage to it, and then you face off with it in an underwater arena at the end. And Sadeas was a pretty interesting fight. People are, again, very mixed on the whole idea of water combat, but as far as the size and scale of a fight, it was not something that was super common in a lot of games. And regardless of what you think of the fight, the theme that plays when you fight Sadeas is really cool. It's this sort of orchestral theme with these vocals in the Monster Hunter language. It's really cool and really epic. So even if you weren't a fan of underwater fights, I think fighting this particular monster was very interesting. So I'd put Sadeas on B tier. I'm gonna put it above. I'm going to put it above Desert Barioth here, below Teostra. The overall epicness of the fight and its design and stuff carry it pretty far up the list. I think Sadeas is a pretty cool monster. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to bring it back without doing underwater combat, which I don't know if I would be a fan of, but you never know. Overall, it's a pretty respectable monster from Tri. Later on in Tri Ultimate, or 3U, they introduced a subspecies, Goldbeard Sadeas. This one functioned very similar fight-wise, but it had some different attacks and was a bit more aggressive. Goldbeard was alright. Its gear was pretty good, but I don't think I'd rate it quite as high because it doesn't do a ton differently. It's a similar fight. Let's put Goldbeard on C tier. I'll put it probably below Shrieking. I think it's design-wise stands out a little bit, but it's not super different. So we'll put it down here, sort of in the middle. Next up, another Elder Dragon from Tri. We have Jhenmuranh, and this one is interesting because I remember when Tri first came out, that was one of the first Monster Hunter games I played. I think we went Freedom Unite, Tri, then Portable third. I can't remember. I have to go back and dig up the one video where I talked about all the games I played. But when Tri came out, the whole idea of a siege type encounter hadn't really been developed further than what we saw in like Lao Shan and the older games. So Jhenmuranh was pretty unique at the time. To sort of recap for those who've never played the game, it's this sort of large sand whale type monster you fight in the desert. When you go into the whole siege, you're on sand boats running alongside it, and you have to shoot it with cannons and keep it from knocking your boat over. And then at some point you get the ability to jump on its back and destroy parts of its body, and then jump back on. You have to continue the fight. Then at the end you enter the final showdown with Jen, and you're squaring off against this massive desert whale creature and trying to kill it before it gets too close and breaks the remainder of your ship. So I would say the scale of the fight was something not really seen in Monster Hunter before, and as a result I'd put that decently high. People seem to be somewhat mixed on the fight itself, but I think it's worth noting that it was a bit more of a unique encounter. So I'm going to put Jen up here towards the bottom of B tier. I think its fight's definitely more interesting than Lao Shan. And it sort of paved the way for things like the Zora Magdaros fight in current gen. So overall, I'd say it's sufficient for getting a decent ranking. And the monster's design itself is pretty neat. It's just this giant sand whale. Its subspecies, Hallowed Genmoran, came out in 3U, I believe. Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate's the subspecies. This is pretty much the same fight. It follows a slightly different attack pattern than the regular Genmoran, but aside from doing damage, more damage, and having this sort of crystalline purple look to it, the subspecies fight wasn't necessarily that different. So I'm gonna put Hallowed Genmoran, put it towards the bottom of C tier. I don't think it really justifies a D tier ranking because it was still a challenge, but we'll go ahead and put it down here towards the bottom of C. It wasn't a fight, and I remember running terribly off. Moving on, we have a cousin to the regular Genmoran and its subspecies. We have Darenmoran, and this one was introduced in Monster Hunter 4, and so I would have hunted it in 4U. This was a slightly retooled version of the Sand Siege from Monster Hunter Tri and 3 Ultimate. Darenmoran looks a lot like Gen, but it has a different sort of shape to its body. It's still a large land whale type creature, but it's got this sort of drill-like nose and these sharp plates all over its body. It's a bit more spiky and a dark red in color. Overall, Darenmoran was cool. The fight was sort of a throwback to what you did in 3U and Tri. I think personally, ranking this one is going to weight more heavily towards the design than the fight, since the fight was very similar. So I'm going to put this one on C tier. I'll put it above Rusted Kushala. Darenmoran was cool. It's not really a carbon copy per se, but it's very similar to Gen. The idea of fighting a giant sand whale was interesting. It's something I think they could build on for the next games. Next up, we have another Elder Dragon that recently got to make its current generation debut after being in several games, and that's Alatreon. Alatreon is my favorite Elder Dragon. Looking at the list here, I wouldn't say by a long shot, but thinking back through all the other games I've played and all the Elder Dragons, it's near the top of my list almost every time. I can't think of another Elder that I like more in the current and old gen, so we're going to put Alatreon up here on S tier. I'm going to put it after Narga. In the older games, the way you fought this monster was kind of similar to the way they did in Iceborne. Basically, you and a giant avatar dragon with four multiple elements in an enclosed arena. The fight itself was a bit different in that Alatreon didn't have water attacks in the older games. You'd have to deal with dragon, fire, thunder, and ice. And then for Iceborne, they gave it the ability to create water hazards that it lights on fire for whatever reason. But the idea of a multi-element creature that's sort of like this devastating force of nature was always neat. And as a result, I think both in design and fight, I'd put Alatreon up here near the top of the list. It's definitely difficult in Iceborne, but having fought it and killed it several times, I can say that while I'm not a big fan of its DPS check mechanic, overall I think it's a good fight and it's well implemented. I'm hoping they bring it back in the later games. It's a very, very neat and iconic Elder Dragon. Next up on the list, we have another Elder Dragon that debuted in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. We have Amatsu. Amatsu, well, I don't think is necessarily as high on the list for me as Alatreon. It's still pretty high up there. You fight this one on this sort of cloud-shrouded peak, sky peak, and it's a big billowy flying storm dragon. Essentially, its native element's water, but it has the ability to create these wind storms that can kill you. It shoots these laser beams of water all over the arena, and overall its fight has a pretty big sense of scale in that you fight it and the music sort of ramps up over time and it gets angrier and goes in different phases. They brought Amatsu back for Generations and Generations Ultimate, which was pretty cool to see. Generations and then also Generations Ultimate. Yeah, I like Amatsu. It's pretty unique for an Elder Dragon. Overall fun fight, and again, its music is awesome. So I'm going to put Amatsu up here on high A tier. I think I'm going to put it above Astalos and below Fatalis. Seeing Amatsu in current gen would be interesting. I think they could do a lot with its whole storm controlling mechanics. And overall, it's definitely worthy of a high place on the list. Moving on, taking a break from Elder Dragons for a little bit, which is weird that it's placed here, but the next monster is a deviant from Generations. This is Deadeye Garuga, I believe. Deadeye Yan Garuga. Interestingly enough, this deviant is similar to the One-Eyed Garuga, which is down here. I think that's considered a variant versus this one's a deviant. Introduced in Generations, this deviant had a slightly different move set compared to the regular vanilla flavor of Garuga. From what I remember, I didn't fight this monster a ton, but it was very quick and had a lot of really deadly attacks that all focused around poison. I think it had, Wiki says, noxious poison or deadly poison. It had a higher tier of poison than its regular version, which is even more dangerous. Sort of like the Dread Queen Rathian, you had to go into that fight pretty well prepared or you'd be killed pretty quickly. Design wise, Deadeye Garuga is fine. It has the whole scarred one eye thing going, and it's got this mix of purples and greens and sort of bright and dark colors. I'm going to put this one on C tier, sort of in the middle. I think it's more interesting than some of the other subspecies, but I wouldn't rate it high as a deviant. We'll put Deadeye Yan Garuga sort of in the middle, C tier. Next up, we have a whole bunch of Elder Dragons. I think it's nothing but Elder Dragons for a little bit now. We've got the quote-unquote final boss of Monster Hunter 3U. We have Dire Miralis. Dire Miralis is a pretty unique Elder Dragon. Its body type is similar to Fatalis and the larger scale dragons, but this one is unique in that you fight it sort of in a cove on the coast. You start off on the beach and you have to go into the water to fight this particular Elder Dragon, and it's big. It's what appears to be a couple stories tall, and you fight it in the water, and then at some point it gets out of the water and you fight it on land, and it sort of goes back and forth. The Dire Miralis is this sort of big volcanic dragon. It has wings, but it can't really fly. Its body sort of pulses with lava, and it's capable of shooting volcanic rocks at you. Overall, it's a really unique design and a pretty cool fight. Whether or not you're a fan of underwater combat or not, I do think Dire Miralis is a pretty cool scale of fight and design. So as a result, I'm going to put Dire Miralis up on A tier. I think I'm going to put you lower than a Contour. I remember farming Dire Miralis for its gear. It had the best fire weapons in the game, I believe, in 3U. Overall, pretty cool concept and design, and pretty fun fight too. So mid A tier, I think, is a good place for Dire Miralis.